Where were you born?
I was born in North London, Tottenham. My father worked at the British drug houses. He had been, well, they took him right at the beginning, but he was sent out because he was disabled. There was a problem and they couldn't have him in the army. So he joined the ARP in the war. And my mother lived at home and just looked after us. Well, I continued with school all the time. Excuse me. And I used to be apparently quite a good reader. So when the air raid warnings went, we had a shelter built in the playground. And we used to go in there and I used to have to sit and read to them all to keep them quiet. Quite a few streets away I had an aunt who was bombed out twice and eventually evacuated with my cousins and so forth, because the aunt was my sister's mother.
Where were they?
We had the first, no, I can't remember what they called the bombs. They sort of screamed and then shut off quietly and then went.
They were the V-bombs.
V-bombs, yes. Yeah. And we had one, we lived in a small road that had a railway running along the back of it. And so it was a road of about 12 houses each side, and it formed a crossroads. And we had the first VE bomb drop in the crossroads in the middle of it. Do you remember that large crater?
Can you describe the way the bomb came over?
Well, just hearing the scream and then silence, and then you sit and wait and see what's happening, you know. And, yeah. So all our windows were blown out. My father, I had a grandmother living with us too, who was bedridden. So my father was working in the daytime, and then at night he was ARP, so he used to go out around the streets and then come in and make a cup of tea and go up to my grandmother and see how she was, and come down to what we called the dugout, the air raid shelter, and see to us, and then off again. So he had quite a hectic life, I think, quite a worrying one, you know. And my mother, she didn't work. She was very annoyed. My father wouldn't let her because there was a lot of factory work in those days of women making parachutes and all sorts of things, but he didn't believe in that. He said, no, women shouldn't work. And so she stayed at home, but she wasn't very happy really, because I think every other woman in the street were doing some sort of ammunition or work of some sort, you know.
So your mum was a bit frustrated that she couldn't join the war.
She was, yes, she was. I think it affected the relationship of my parents afterwards, after the war. Because my mother always seemed to hold it against him that she hadn't gone out to do any work.
Have you got any particular memories or experiences during the war?
I've got one specific one, or two actually. One when I was at school, and we'd been down the air raid shelter, and then there'd been bombs dropping, and then the siren went off, it was over. And going up to school and looking through the window, it was almost lunchtime, I think, and I could see flames and fire, and I thought our house had been hit. And the teacher let me run home. Didn't live that far away, and she let me run home to see, because I was worried about my mum.
But everything was okay?
Yes, it was fine, yeah. Obviously further away, you know. And the second one was at night. It was the Battle of Britain night, actually, when all the aircraft. And my father had sunk the Anderson shelter in the garden, and we used to have to go through his shed, down some steps, and then down into the Anderson shelter. And he always had food down there, and water and so forth, and everything. And this certain night, the air raid warning went up, and we all went down, and suddenly there was searchlights everywhere. It was really lit up, and I was sort of pushed inside to go down the shelter, but I think my mother was outside, and I remember looking through the crack in the door. And I think all the neighbours were out there, and there was aeroplanes sort of shooting at one another overhead, very vividly I remember. And when one was hit, they'd all be cheering, you know. And then somebody called out, I think it was a man called out, "Stop cheering, you so-and-sos, it could be one of ours." And I can remember that bit very vividly, you know, with the planes and that. And, yeah.
Did you just see the Battle of Britain on that one night, or
Yes.
did you see it on
No, on
many
that one night it was a really big, you know, sort of occasion, isn't it? Yeah. It was really overhead. I can you know, sort of see the searchlights and the planes now, and all the people out in the gardens. Yeah.
How did that make you feel as a little child?
I didn't appear frightened at the time, but it did affect me. There's probably a lot of things that affected me, not just the war, but I suppose with my grandmother and this, that and the other. And for a long, long time I used to twitch and shake my head, and I think that was the effect, you know. Yeah. I mean, I know one night my father had apparently come home and taken some tea to my grandmother, and come down with a tray of tea to come out of the back steps along the garden and into the air raid shelter for us. And a bomb went off somewhere, and all the glass fell out, you know, all over him. So he was all right, but he came into the shelter, you know. We'd lost all the glass in the windows in the house. And my sister, that was in the fire service, when she was home, she would rarely come down to the air raid shelter when the warning went off, because she said she was sat up on the top of Clerkenwell fire station, actually directing the fire engines to the areas that the bombs had dropped. You know, they had to direct them around. And she said if that bomb had my number on it, you know, I'd have it anyway, so why bother? I'm going to sleep in my bed. But she did come down, I can remember, at least once in there, and we had a shell that actually went under our shelter, and it threw her off the bunk. There was bunks around, threw her off the bunk onto me and really flattened me. And they found that shell, how long afterwards? It must have been quite a few weeks after, when the woman in the next road realised when she went into her porch that there was a crack, and it was underneath her front doorstep. It hadn't exploded. So,
Where you were in North London, it obviously suffered a great deal of bomb damage. Can you remember how long it took to repair that?
no, I can't. Obviously quite a long time, but I can remember running around the streets, obviously, you know, going wherever you were going, and all these you know, the houses that were bombed and that there, and all the big weeds growing out, because there's one plant I specifically don't like now, and I think that's a memory of seeing all these very tall weeds with sort of pink flowers running down them. And, yeah.